Hi, Ron. It's Grant Abbott speaking, and welcome to the 7 Super SMSF Strategies to have your best SMSF year ever. I started building these last week, and I did a session for our I Love SMSF strategist and scholar members last week on the important things, the compliance and other things that they needed to do at the start of the year, and there's quite a list of them. Then I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to come out and talk about where we're going over the next financial year, now that we've got a brand new year starting up. And importantly, from that perspective is how we can make it really our best SMSF year ever. You've heard me before, we've all escaped, the wrath of the potential Labor Party and industry funds. We've got SMSFs up and around, and I'm really going to point out to you, we've really got a huge opportunity to make this our best SMSF year ever. And more importantly, with some of the strategies, although I talk about 7, you'll probably find within each strategy, there's 4 strategies. So there's around about 20, 25 strategies. So I'm going to be hitting you really hard on them. We've got a lot to go through. Importantly, from that perspective is just, you'll get a recording of this. You'll also get a CPD certificate, which is based, as you can see down here, the FACEA CPD areas of activity, to 0.25 general and 0.75 technical competence. So we'll go through all of those. You'll get a recording of that. You'll also get a few links to bits and bobs around there. Just as a typical thing, if you need to have a chat with anyone, please just chat on the chat line or do a Q&A. I've got my team at I Love SMSF, my strategy team there to support you. Anyway, we've got a lot to get through, so let's get on. You may or may not know, but today we opened up an equity capital raising for the Lightyear Group, which includes Lightyear Docs and I Love SMSF. So now we're going to do everything legally. So here's our disclaimer. Obviously, everything's just for education purposes, so on and so forth. But we'll send you out these slides as well. Oops, went the wrong way. So let's move on. Now, I don't know about you, but look, the world is moving so fast and it's changing quite dramatically. We're forever on our phones. Time seems to be at a premium. I think there's plenty of money and strategies out there. It's a matter of effectively communicating it with our clients. Webinars like this are great. We had 400 or so registered, so it's a fantastic opportunity to not only get in front of people, but also train people at the same time. We're in a brand new financial year already, and for me, that's a blank canvas. Time to set goals, desires, and really build momentum into achievements. It's time to really have our best SMSF year ever. For me, I'm constantly thinking always of new ideas, strategies. A lot of these come from technical questions or support emails that have come through to I Love SMSF or Lightyear Docs. I pull them apart, and then what we do is I start to rebuild them again and make sure that there's little bits here, little bits there. And some of the ones I've done have been absolutely amazing, particularly in the property development side. So it's a matter of getting the strategies, building them, getting the compliance and documentation right. And more importantly, the system that we've got through Lightyear Docs allows us to automate strategies. We've already got up on the site a related party LRBA for property, which I will be talking about a little bit later on. By next week in our training session, which is not this Thursday, which we're looking at discretionary trust, but the following Thursday, we'll be releasing our own instalment warrants that you guys will actually be able to build for your clients using related party loans, such as money from family trust bucket companies or individuals, or simply by way of an in-specie loan we'll talk about. Anyway, we'd love to work alongside you next year to make sure that you have the best year ever and ensure that two sides, that one, you get the best training, the best strategies, and also the best automation. Now, for us, really, we've been given a gift. This is my 25th year in SMSFs. So happy 25th year, not only for me, but also for self-managed super funds, which started their life as an excluded fund way back in 1994. Since that time, they effectively grew from virtually next to nothing to now more than $750 billion sitting in SMSFs. The stats we've got up there, they're straight from APRA, and also this was taken out of a broadsheet by the Australian, or the Association of Super Funds of Australia. So one thing I wanted to point there, though, is can you see the retail and the industry funds, which are direct competitors to self-managed superannuation funds? We've got 11, can you believe this, 11.6 million accounts across 37 funds, and with total assets of 678 billion. Now, the first thing I know about technology, particularly building the platform that we've done, is that when you've got 11.6 million accounts over only 37 funds, really the options, the ability to do anything out of the norm, apart from getting a virtual like a minute miner, is very tough, which is why the average industry super fund balance is only 58,450. Compared to SMSF's, our average member, and this is not average fund, this is average member balance is $680,910. So if you're going to work in one area, look at the area that you want to work in. And more importantly, from my perspective, is the next slide that we've got is, again, this is from the ASFA statistics, also Treasury and the RIM Group and Cooper Review. This is where we're getting projected superannuation assets by, if we have a look, virtually 10 years from now, we're up around about $5 trillion to $6.5 trillion in superannuation assets. And by 2040, which is hopefully when I may retire, but if you're still going to listen to me, I'll still be around. I don't know why people keep on thinking I'm going to retire. I just simply sell a business. And once it gets to a stage where I want and move on to the next business, I'll move on. So I'll be around here for a long time. The main thing for us is when we have a look here, 2040, that I've broken down the stats and used the exact participation rate of SMSFs, which is currently 31 to 32%, and projected that out. By 2030, there'll be 1.37 billion. And remember, at the moment, we've got 750 billion. By 2040, it'll be 2.3 trillion, or $2,335 billion. So for the youngsters out there, or anyone who's under age 50, this is the place to work for the next 10 or 20 years. And I've seen it in the past. I've seen a number of people, when SMSF first started, people who were following me, working alongside me in the 90s, dropped out, only to come back in 10 or 15 years later when they could have had an awesome business, an awesome career, but they missed out along the way. So if we're looking at it, don't miss the SMSF train. But the main thing about the train is we have to make sure we've got strategies. Okay, let's start with the first one. Oops, I'm getting too excited here. Look, 1, 2, 3, all in a row. The first one is compliance. Now, this is a boring strategy, and I promise I've got hundreds more coming on down the track. But effectively, from this perspective, is if we don't get our compliance right, then our SMSF advice is going to be at worst 0, or at worst or the next best, it's going to be pretty wonky. And I don't know about you, but I've seen some horrendously wonky things in relation to SMSFs. Just on that one, one of our team, Ashley Jarman, just effectively was been trying to roll her money over to set up a SMSF in order to invest into the Lightyear Group, and has had huge amounts of problems with MLC, notwithstanding the fact she's given them a compliance certificate. She actually is supposed to need to talk to an advisor in order to be told about the risks involved in relation to SMSFs. So that's the sort of rubbish that's going on in retail or industry funds. Now, of course, and this is something that you might want to take down the track, I did a really quick email up that basically put the names of all the directors of the MLC trustees of the superannuation fund on notice, telling them that effectively, if they don't release the monies as required under Section 52A of the SIS Act, and having regard to Irving and Dunstan, that effectively Ashley has got an action under Section 55(3) of the SIS Act to claim damages. And that can be quite substantial damages if the potential investment she could have had 2 weeks ago has gone up quite substantially. So there's that one. And the other one is obviously the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. So again, if you're having some tardiness or delay, and particularly now that SuperStream rollovers isn't coming on for quite some time, please feel free to contact me, support at ilovesmsf.com, or just simply Grant at ilovesmsf.com, and I'll send that nice, nasty letter to you. What it does is jumps through the administration because you're putting the director trustees on notice. it'll go straight up to the board. So you're not going to have any problems about getting that money. From us, look, there's so much information, guidelines, comments from industry lawyers, so on and so forth, that we really need to heed to make sure that we get our compliance platform right. If we don't heed it, then we're going to end up bleeding. We've seen a lot of that sort of case. So first off is get your deeds up to date, particularly ready for 6 members, and also the following strategies. You should really be putting in place an investment strategy now. An investment strategy is a forward-looking document. If you haven't seen the training on that, you can go onto Light Year Docs on the Support Centre. I did a whole hour session on investment strategies and also pension payment documentation. So go and have a look at that. I'll break down the law, but more importantly, put in play or put in train the issues that may face an advisor or an accountant or a particular auditor who doesn't see that investment strategy is created at the start of the year. So for a good compliance platform, put that in place now. Convert any pensions you've got to auto-reversionary pensions. You've seen there's been a lot of discussion out about that, about whether an auto-reversionary is more important than a binding death benefit nomination. The tax office said of the case, as is a number of court cases. So what we want to do is, the problem, if we don't have an auto-reversionary pension, we've just got an ordinary pension. When that ceases, that goes back to the accumulation stage, and a whole set of disasters can potentially fall in that regard. Again, we'll send you through a link. Actually, I'll send you through a link to that webinar I did last week. If you're going to set up a contribution suspense or reserve account, make sure you pay it out by the 28th of July. If you don't pay it out by the 28th of July, effectively, there's potential for a $4,000 fine. What I would do is, if you've got a TRIS, look, TRISs, you've heard my arguments on TRIS. TRISs are not long-term pension options. They're short, in and out sort of vehicles. So if you've got clients with an existing TRIS, remember it's on the accumulation side. I find out from them, again, use our pension payment documentation, our TRIS payment documentation. You'll see that when I send through the link to the webinar. Simply find out what they want from the TRIS, pay out the 10%, and then what I would do is I would fold it back. So cease the TRIS, put it back into accumulation. It's going to save you a lot of accounting issues at year end. So TRISs, I'd get rid of it. Okay, let's go through and have a look at some more strategies. So next one is invest for a tax effect. Now, obviously, as we go down the track, and I'm going to start getting into the wonky tax stuff here, we can get tax deductible contributions from an employment or a personal contributions, and they're vital throughout the year. Generally, we look at year end and we start to make these contributions. Now, what we've done is in our minds, and this has been around since 2007, many of us have got locked into our minds the fact that we can only go up to the cap. Now, it's ridiculous that there's a flat rate cap for anyone of $25,000 at the moment for concessional contribution. So that's a personal or it's an employer. Alternatively, you can actually mix and match if you want. Now, importantly, the concessional contributions aren't, and if you've heard me before, aren't necessarily, although they're called caps, they actually have thresholds. I had the legislation out, I was going to take it and read to you, but if I turn to section 291 and look at concessional contributions, what it basically says, if you go above the threshold or the cap of $25,000, then that amount that goes above will be added back to the member's assessable income. So what we need to do is we'll have a look at that from a perspective shortly when we get into contributions and how we work with family trusts on that one. But important for us is it's not a bad idea to start at this point in time, particularly for clients who've had a good year last year and have got a potential to have a good year this year in terms of their business, to start a super contribution budget. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, okay, well, this year we're going to make X amount of concessional contributions. Again, we don't worry about the caps. We go and work out the tax effect of everything after that. And then what we do is we go back and we'll say, okay, well, what we need to do on a monthly basis is put this in, put this in, put this in, put this in. So they get a good regime going throughout the year, taken out of their cash flow directly from their family trust, their bucket company or whatever, going into the superannuation and claiming a deduction where need be. Now, importantly, where the contributions go into SMSF, what happens is they become taxable contributions under section 295(160), of the Income Tax Assessment Act. So they just become part of the fund's assessable income as a taxable contribution, as opposed to if we put that money into a retail or industry fund, that money generally, sometimes you're lucky, but generally, if it comes from an employer, it's an SGC, the retail or industry fund may take 15% up front out of that contribution, and then put the net amount into a member's account. So effectively, there's a loss of 15% up front. Whereas in SMSF, we actually have an opportunity. If we know we're going to put in so much concessional, then what my idea here is to actually invest in order to mitigate that potential concessional contributions tax that's going to be coming up in 18 months' time or 12 months' time. So what we want to do there is also springs to me a little bit of a benefit, where we've got younger members in the fund. By bringing that next generation in, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, the benefit there is that those younger members aren't going to lose that 15% up front. And potentially, if their parents or the older members of the fund have got imputation credits flying through, or some of the tax credits I'll be looking at a little bit later on, then effectively they may go contributions tax-free. In fact, I think for the first 10 years of being in my mum and dad's fund, thanks to imputation credits, I didn't have to pay any contributions tax. Thank you very much, my father, for that one. Now, of course, you can do a tax adjustment under the Light Year Docs D, but that's up to you. Now, when it comes down to investment strategies, we could have one investment strategy for the fund, which is, let's say, okay, we work out our proportionate rate, particularly if they've got pensions, what percentage is pension, what percentage is accumulation, and then we work out our tax-exempt proportion. Now, for the more sophisticated of you, and I challenge you to go down this track, and again, if we go down and become strategists and strategizing, we need to go down and work out, well, for the smarter ones is potentially to offer a pension strategy. If we've got a pension and accumulation account, which many of your clients do, we should have a separate investment strategy for the pension account, which relates to the provision of income stream or franking credits in an income stream, and then a separate investment strategy for accumulation. Because essentially the accumulation is really going to be used for estate planning purposes, unless we need it, for example, aged care, paying a refundable accommodation deposit. It's generally going to be looked at for the next generation because the pension is income stream for life. So ideally, particularly the planners out there, you can use your investment strategy, but we've got completely different conflicting or competing interests. One income stream, one not an income stream, because we don't want to be paying tax. We want to actually have a growth investment. Now, we can also get the same thing, having separate investment strategies. I talk about bringing younger members in the fund. Now, if we've got a 25 or a 35-year-old and we've got a 70-year-old member in the fund, they're hardly going to use the same investment strategies because the very nature of them have got completely different requirements in terms of one drawing out an income, the other one is accumulating in a growth sort of style of asset. So again, we can have separate investment strategies for separate members in the fund. What we do there is we run it as a sub-fund, and again, you'll find that in the Light Year Docs D. You can run it as a sub-fund, and then effectively all the income and expenses will be deducted and taken into account in that sub-fund, and that was just simply the members' sub-fund. So that's actually been around since 1994, but now that we're starting to get ready for that 6-member rule, then we're really in that great position. Now, also, if we've got separate pensions, I know some of you have got different pensions for clients, one being primarily a tax-free component pension, so that on the death of the member, the pension, if it's paid out to adult children, although they will be dependents, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, when it comes out, it'll be tax-free, compared to a pension which is primarily taxable component. Provided you made those adjustments, then in effect we've got a position that we will have the taxable component. So my idea on this would be that for the tax-free components we go through, we simply take the minimum out of that, and then what we do is we take the minimum plus whatever else we need out of the taxable component pension. Now, when we have a look at that, that again seems to have striated or necessarily having separate investment strategies for each of those different pensions. I have seen funds with up to 6 pensions in them, believe it or not, because there's been different amounts coming in over time. It's probably a bit over the top for me. But again, if we start to look at building those different pensions, and more importantly, we can switch over we can switch over assets in between different investment strategies. Again, there's generally no tax consequences for that. There's no SIS consequences for it. If we can see an assets and accumulation side that's about to take off, say an ESIC investment that we know that is going to increase over time, as it goes on the increase, perhaps we want to put that over to the pension side, in a tax-free component pension, where obviously there's huge upside for growth, and we're maximising the growth in the pension because we never know when we are going to need it. So again, it can make a huge difference. If we pick up that upside, and that's on the pension side, then that increases the underlying proportion of our assets that are referable to pensions as determined by the actuary. So again, this is where we're starting to make a huge difference. It's just tweaking around the edges, but it can make a significant difference. On tax deductibles, which are really important to mitigate and minimise our contributions tax, we've obviously got interest from LRBAs. We've got depreciation capital allowances if we've bought property inside the fund. Professional fees, obviously your professional fees, education costs. So don't discount the fact that I do know a couple of advisors who do run education programs for their clients. And I think that's certainly a great way of not only doing for that, but also prospects. If you need to do that, certainly if you're on our Strategies membership, I've got a lot of material for that for you to go out and train your clients, right from how do I set up a self-managed super fund to how to wind it up, or the necessary estate planning benefits. And then, of course, we've got our lovely ones, which are our tax offsets, which I love. Obviously, most of you know franking credits. This is a perfect time at the moment to make sure you load up franking credits inside the fund, particularly now that the government's obviously keeping it in, and the refundable, as they call it, free cash. I love that one. So the franking credits will obviously get a 30% credit. Even if it's in the pension stage, that can go to reduce the contributions tax. And even if we've just got accumulation stage and we're putting money in and we're investing in these franking credits, then effectively what will happen from there is those franking credits will go to reduce our contributions tax. The other one you may not be aware of is the innovation, early startup or early stage innovation company, ESIC companies. If you're investing in an ESIC company, for example, we're expecting the Lightyear Group to be an ESIC company because of the R&D that we've spent on getting our systems up and running, then it means you get a 20% tax offset. Now that offset's not refundable, so that will actually be parlayed against our contributions tax straight away. So again, that tax offset is perfect, so we can invest in one of these. If it's a deductible investment, then what will happen is we've got a 20% tax offset, 15% contributions tax, so we've still got some shelter for other tax in there. The important about the ESICs, apart from the 20% tax offset on your capital, which is really unheard of, also if it's a trade sale, IPO or disposed of within the first 10 years, effectively there is no capital gains tax. So let's move on to strategy 3. I've just got a question here, so I'll just do that. The question's from me, Mui. Mr. X has 2 SMSFs, both in pension mode, totaling 1.6. He wants to take out as a lump sum from Fund 1, which is 10% tax-free, and recontribute it into Fund 2, which is 100% tax-free. He says a lump sum is a debit to his TBA, so he will create cap space, which will allow his recontribution. Sounds too good to be true? No, not at all. So that's a pretty important, and can I just go on this? This isn't the strategy I want to talk about, it's just a basic one. I covered this in the webinar last week, but essentially we should only ever take minimums from our pensions. Anything over and above a minimum, and again, I hasten you to really have a look at the webinar I did, built into our Lightyear Docs pension payment pension payments is that the member of the fund tells the trustee that any amount over and above their minimum pension payment is to be treated as a commutation. So rather than doing a commutation payment each and every time, which is available on the Light Year Docs site, effectively what we do is it's just automated. It's built into the documentation. And there's also some good ones there on minimum pensions and promissory notes if you don't make your minimum pension for the year. But essentially, by taking the money out as a commutation, not a pension payment, it is a debit to our TBA. So the strategy we just talked about, absolutely perfect for that. I'd love to get into a little bit more detail. If you want to throw some information to me, just send it to Grant at ilovesmsf.com. But otherwise from that, it's perfect. Let's move on to strategy 3, contributions. So again, let's go back and take it in a completely different way and start to have a think about this, because this is going to be the theme over the next 2 or 3 strategies. I think most of us really know how a discretionary trust works. For those of you who are younger, and probably particularly if you come from the superannuation or the planning side, you don't know about discretionary trust. What happens is in Australia, we set up a discretionary trust or a family trust, and according to Bamford and the law, enables us to stream, because it's discretionary, the trustee has the ability to distribute not only income to different beneficiaries, like for example, all income could go down to a bucket company if the trustee of the fund sees fit, or it could go down to, for example, a 75-year-old father of the key appointer of the discretionary trust. So not only can we choose where it goes, but we can also choose the style of income. So for example, if the discretionary trust has received dividends with franked income, we can stream that to a specific person who needs it. If they're receiving capital gains, we can stream that to someone else. So when we have a look at a discretionary trust, the ability to mitigate and minimise capital gains and other taxes and income taxes by streaming out to the family really mitigates and minimises the taxation of taxation of monies coming through the family trust, which obviously the more we minimise taxation, the greater will effectively be our family wealth. So discretionary trust is really a family unit. We've got to be careful around that one. And I'd encourage you all to sign up for my training on discretionary trusts this Thursday at 10 a.m. So I'll go through a lot more of these issues. Now, what I want to do is when we have a look at it, and we have a look at point 2 here, if trust distributions are made to 3 generations of a family, so we look at ages 74 to age 14. So we might have the grandparents at age 74 over 70s. We might have their children, in the mid 40s, and they've obviously got children there. So we've got 3 generations. Now, with the parents and the children, if it's coming out of family trust, first and foremost, those people can effectively be employed by the family trust. But you are going to need to make sure that you do have a written employment agreement in place, which needs to, if you're going to do salary sacrifice, there's an old commissioner's ruling, you need to do that up front. So if you're going to look at these strategies, make sure you have an employment agreement up front. Again, we'll have one up on the Light Year Docs site next week, which is the employment agreement, or maybe the week after. So again, watch out for the training there. We don't release anything unless we have training around it, which is important. So then we have the 14-year-old. So again, a 14-year-old can be employed. For those of you who've got clients with businesses, it's important you can actually employ a child for any really of any age. Importantly from that is if they're employed, the contributions can be made. I won't go into it. I did have a look at last week. There's a commissioner's ruling which talks about contributions being paid in excess of what the work's actually being done. For example, if we had a look at the 74-year-old, they might work 20 hours a month, and they might take no cash. They just salary sacrifice, but they might salary sacrifice $75,000 into super. So there is a debit against the family trust. That money goes over into superannuation. So again, we have to look at, and I'll look at that a little bit later on in terms of caps, but the money goes directly over, obviously becomes a taxable contribution to the fund and is accessible to the fund. You know, we do all those contributions tax, and hopefully we've got imputation credits, so on and so forth. And the same thing happens with a 14-year-old. Now, we could put in the same thing. We can put in $75,000 on behalf of a 14-year-old. But the problem about that is, unlike our family trust, and generally you wouldn't make a distribution ordinarily to a 14-year-old because it's subject to high rates of penalty tax. Once they're non-minors, then it's a completely different scenario. But certainly for a family trust, we can employ them. We can make distributions alternatively to those. But if you have a look at which generation is better in terms of contributions to a family, which generation do you think is it going to be? The people at age 74, or the people age 14, or the business owners at age between 40 to 50? Quite clearly, there's two different aspects here. Whichever has the best tax result, obviously, and more importantly, for SMSF, access to their super. Putting in large super contributions for a 14-year-old is okay, but bearing in mind they're not going to be able to touch it for a long time, and who knows what the rules are going to be there. Whereas someone who's age 74, they've already met a condition of release at age 65, so the money can go straight into an accumulation account and effectively can come out straight away if we want to choose to do that. And when it comes out, obviously, it's a lump sum if we don't want to set up a pension. When it comes out, obviously, it's going to be tax-free. So importantly from that, if it comes out tax-free and we've still got capacity to make contributions, we can pull it out and then recontribute it back into the SMSF, and then that'll make it tax-free contribution inside the fund. So that's just a little twist on it. So when we have a look at deductible contributions, what is the limit? So I talked about here the 75-year-old getting a $75,000 contribution. So it's well and truly above their SGC. And more importantly, it's full salary sacrifice. So when that goes into super, as I said before, it's an accessible contribution, it's a taxable contribution. Now, what is the limit on a deductible contribution? Well, if I turn to 2960, which talks about employer contributions, or I go to personal contributions, which is section 290(160), effectively for that, what happens there is that those deductible contributions, effectively there is no limit. There used to be age-based limits prior to 2007, but there is no limit on the deduction. But however, if we turn to section 291, there is a concessional contribution cap. So if I go back to my 74-year-old and I put in $75,000, then the first $25,000 fits under my cap, which is great. And again, if we've got a wide framework of people in the family, we want to use all of the 25 for everyone, which is possible. But obviously, the higher age they are, the better it is. So when we do that, there's $50,000 of excess concessional contributions. So for that, that is to be added back to their assessable income. Now, importantly, if the 74-year-old is just living off their super, so they have no other income. So this is either money going directly from the employer into super. Alternatively, it can be made as a distribution down to the individual, who can then make a contribution to super. But that's just getting a little bit sophisticated, but let's just play around with it. Then from that perspective, what will happen is that $50,000 is added back to our 74-year-olds assessable income. They have no assessable income because they've been living off their super. Added back, then what we do is we work out our tax rate on that $50,000, bearing in mind there's been an increase in the tax-free thresholds or the thresholds, plus there's also a LIDO, which is a low income tax offset, and also the low and middle income earner tax offset. So we put that all together and we work out our tax payable. But, and this is an important one, on the $50,000 that we have there, if we have a look at the section 291, what it says is we're assuming there that, like a industry or retail fund, effectively what has happened is that there has been a a situation that there's been a 15% tax paid, so they give you a 15% offset. So on $50,000, what we have there is effectively $7,500 tax offset. So in essence, what that means is that that is around about the figure now of tax payable on the $50,000 add back. And because there's an excess concessional contribution charge on the tax payable, there is no tax payable on that. So now that we've gone to this new tax regime or new tax scales, we find now that particularly we've got retirees that effectively tax payable on $75,000 with a $50,000, which comprises of a salary sacrifice contribution or personal contribution, is generally nil if they have no other assessable income. So have a really good look at that one. And again, spread the love, particularly if you're looking at a family and we might have 4 retiree members. We've just got to be very careful, of course, around about the age pension or social security on that one. Now, the big skin in the tail, though, is that $50,000 or the $75,000 is an assessable contribution. So we need our tax deductibles and our tax offsets, our ESSEX, and also our franking credits. So let's move on. Let's have a look at some property stuff, which I love. We've done a lot of stuff at TGA Legal, which is, I'm a specialist consultant there. That is the legal firm that provides sign-off for all your documents. Now, the blinding obvious is the transfer of business real property into an SMSF with or without an LRBA using the PCG 2016/5 or NALI rules. In order to do that, there's a lot of documents you need to put together, particularly if you're doing an LRBA. So there's a holding trust. You need to probably, I'd be upgrading the deed, upgrading the corporate trustee. Obviously, you need to do an investment strategy built in there as well. If it's going to be over the pension side, which is a prime place to have that investment strategy, a good income producing asset, and then we need to put that in. We need to do a simple transfer, so you don't need to do an exchange of contracts because both parties are effectively related. We've got to make sure we get a good valuation, and then of course we need to do a commercial lease back to our entity. So there's around about 10 or 11 documents, but if need be, look, please feel free to do that. We can do it at TGA Legal for a fixed fee of probably around about $3,000 to $4,000 maximum. Now, if we're purchasing a residential property like this is a bit of a super strategy. So I'd say this is maybe a 5-starer. So hopefully for the younger guys, you may not keep up with me on this, but let's go through. So if I look at residential property and a joint trust between an SMSF and a family trust or a bucket company. So what we have is we set up a unit trust. It's wholly owned by related parties. So therefore, ordinarily it would be an in-house asset. Now, what we do is we latch on to SIS regulation 1322C. It doesn't necessarily need to be a trust. We could actually use a 1322C company. Now, what will happen there is the family trust or the bucket company that is subscribing for the units in that unit trust, they could borrow to invest in those underlying units, which would give them obviously a tax relief outside the fund. Now, the SMSF can't borrow on those. When we go up to a 1322C trust, effectively we can't borrow inside that vehicle, and it can only really be used for property, not for example, share or other investments. So what will happen there though is we've got a joint vehicle that has a residential property in it. Once it turns tax positive, so the family trust borrows on the units, takes all the depreciation, if it's a new property, depreciation and capital allowances out of it, then effectively what we do from there is we simply, once we take those out, effectively it turns tax positive, we can then actually transfer those units into an SMSF. Ordinarily, a private unit trust like this, we can't transfer those units into an SMSF. But for this instance, what we can do, there's a specific exemption under Section 66 that says 1322C units can be transferred by a related party, a family trust, an individual, or alternatively a bucket company into an SMSF. So as it goes tax positive, we can transfer it in by way of contribution, or we'll talk about it a little bit later on. We could do an LRBA, a stalwart warrant. Linda McPherson, thank you for the question. Is livestock business real property? No. Unfortunately, we can't transfer livestock in. And generally, we want to do that. We can put our business real property, our farming property in, and I've done a lot of strategy papers on that. And to me, it's much better to use super if we can and put our farming property in rather than farm management deposits. And again, I've got a lot of information around that if you need to. Again, just contact me at Grant at ilovesmsf.com. What will happen though is, again, we go up here, we transfer the property in. If it's farming land, then probably we're going to be able to use the small business exemption if we can. And then we do a lease back to the farm, which is lease back to the farming family trust. And in there, that is where the livestock's held. Mainly we do that because that's where we can get obviously deductions, etc., for the business income coming in. So we can transfer over fences and fixtures and fittings to that property. Again, it's a great opportunity, and really to me, it's an absolute no-brainer for that one. One I did 2 weeks, I think it was 2 weeks ago. We released our superannuation unrelated investment trust, which, for example, would allow myself and yourself to use our SMSFs to invest in a unit trust. It's not a related one, as long as neither of us hold more than 50% of the underlying capital and income units in that trust. Importantly, though, is we can then use that unit trust, set it up, take it to the bank, and we can get borrowing, do full property development, or set up a portfolio of properties if we want to do that. One thing you've got to do there is just be careful that if there's only two involved, make sure you get a good unit holders agreement, because if one party wants to get out, and for that you've got to look at Irving and Dunstan as to the problems about having a related unit trust between two parties of different ages. If one wants to get out, then it's very difficult for the other person to acquire those assets. Otherwise it would become an in-house asset, unless of course we can convert it to a 1322C, which means we have to take the borrowing out. So there's a lot of things there. Again, we've done, I've done $30 or $40 million superannuation unrelated investment trusts. So again, if you need help there, but that document is again up on the Lightyear Docs site. But again, what I'd suggest is you want to go and do the training there before you get fully involved. The other one that we have done quite a bit at TGA Legal is doing joint ventures between family-owned development companies and an SMSF. Now, again, we've just got to be really careful about the terms and conditions there, because there's not an issue with the sole purpose test. We're just going to make sure it's fair and reasonable between all parties, and there's valuations all the way down the track. And I'd put to you probably to have a really good look if you're doing this. Have a look at, if you just go into the Commissioner's website, or just go to Google and put in there ATO, can the SMSF run a business? If you do there, that'll flick up the website for the ATO, where the Commissioner considers all the issues that you'll need to go through in order to cover that. But probably if you're looking at a joint venture, definitely go to TGA Legal there in order for them to take their responsibility. I've got Selma, thank you. Have you got any contribution strategies for over 75-year-old? Given they can only contribute employer and SGC, no NCC seems very, very limiting. Look, that's a great question, Selma. That's one of the ones. We're currently going through the process of registering the SMSF party. We obviously didn't get it in time for the election. That is one of our mandates, is that it's discriminatory, extremely discriminatory, to put an age limit on any contributions. That's part of our platform. And certainly once we do get registered, we'll be going down to the Assistant Treasurer, Jane Hume, and making sure that not only do we get lobbying on it, because effectively we'll be a party, but make sure that they try and encompass it in their platform. So to me, effectively the only other way, Selma, I can think of is obviously if you're using your downsizer contributions, they don't apply to anyone over, there's no age limit on there. So Ken, thank you again. This is part of our philosophy. We're getting some great feedback. We've got there that banks don't seem to be happy to lend to unrelated unit trusts. Any banks you can recommend? Anyone? I know there's a few of our guys who have done that lending, but again, this is an open forum between all of us as strategists. We need to work together to build that. So if anything comes up, Ken, absolutely I'll be telling you that. Just while I'm here, I want to announce our new pricing model in terms of both I Love SMSF and also Like Your Docs. Most of you probably are well aware that our documents, we've now got 40 plus documents, and it's at $99 maximum. Our dependency declaration and our NDAs are effectively free. We've got a whole lot of investment strategies and pensions, pension payments, which are only $49. One thing though, I'd probably these are the two. If you're a serious player, look, I don't care what size you are. We have unlimited docs offering for $5.95 a month, which really, when you have a look at some of the prices of upgrades by online document providers or even legal firms of $300-400, effectively there, $5.95 is a pretty good deal. And really, I don't care if you do 1,000 documents in a month. It really doesn't worry me, because we've got a platform that can do $1 million documents an hour. So that's $5.95 a month. If you're interested, contact me or contact anyone at Lightyear. What I would suggest though is the $7.95, which is a great offer. That includes unlimited documents, but also unlimited CPD. So we're doing this CPD. You're going to get your CPD certificate. But for some of you who've got 2, 3, 4, 5 members of a firm, effectively for an extra $200 a month, what we have there is you'll get 30 plus CPD hours for each person, obviously provided you do the CPD. So again, that to me, for most of us, is really an area we want to be playing in. Strategy 5, SMSF estate planning. Now, we're doing a big session on this in October. I'll be doing a roadshow around Australia. So for those of you on our LY Strategist program, effectively the cost for that will just be what our cost is for the day. But we're rolling out a whole estate planning suite at that time. So the main thing is build for succession. I can't believe I was seeing so many funds being wound up. Mainly because there's no one in there that once a balance gets too low, SMSF becomes uneconomical. But if we've got different generations coming in and we've got sub-funds and we've got protection, which I'll talk about the next, then effectively we don't need to wind them up. More importantly, as our senior members of the fund lose their capacity, their EPO trustees can be in there to look after them. One of the things that I will be rolling out in October at our strategy day is a set of binding living directions for members. So what will happen there is like a binding death benefit nomination, but members will actually do a binding nomination as to how their superannuation benefits are to be used by the trustee of the fund in the event of incapacity. It's a really hot ticket item when I go out and do it with SMSF trustees. Just hold on for that. Don't tell clients about that yet. We've got to build the documentation, the strategy automation around that. Create auto-reversionary pensions. You can find that again. Go onto the Lightyear Docs, the resources page or the page there, and you'll find that I've done a webinar on that. You should, with all your auto-reversionaries, you must cover who gets it first and then who gets it second. Even cover to who gets it third, who gets it fourth. More importantly, if the first person, the first reversionary is dead, who's going to get it? So you need to think about this longevity. And what happens if there's no one at the time of death? So we've got 3 options there in our auto-reversionary pensions that you can choose. And again, have a look at that, but we'll certainly be going into estate planning a lot longer. Dependency declarations, absolutely crucial, available on the Lightyear Docs site. What it is, it's an attestation from the member as to who is their financial dependent at the time of execution. Now, it may be that they're receiving a family allowance or potentially school fees or other allowances. Now, of course, at the time of death, that will then be determined whether they are a dependent by the trustee of the fund. So at that point in time, we'll go through. But it's better to have the evidence, the intention, and the document there to say, look, this person was intended to be my dependent. It's better to have that rather than not have it. Look, one of my things about all of this is it's better to have more documentation than less. One, it protects our back, particularly when you have a look at the negligence action and the potential actions under Section 55(3) that aggrieved trustees or beneficiaries may have against us as advisors. Does the money really need to go to the estate? So this is one I want to go through. What I've done is I've built a situation that not necessarily does the superannuation benefits need to go to the estate. If it's to go to an adult child, my preference is that the money, rather than go to the estate, it actually goes through, is paid as a lump sum to an adult child on the condition that it goes into a fixed or discretionary trust for the benefit of that member or that adult child and their bloodline, or whatever conditions you want to put around it. That way, it doesn't go out to the estate, so therefore it's not impacted by each state's Family Provisions Act or Dependency Act. What it will be done, though, is it's actually protected under the SIS Act. And if that payment is not made out to a trust, effectively it's either forfeited and may end up in the estate, or alternatively, if someone tries to dodgy around it, Section 202 can make them liable for a 5-year imprisonment. Post-pension accumulation accounts, you've heard me about that. Look, if you've already got clients with post-pension accumulation accounts, I like the strategy earlier on is to try and clear that out and make it tax-free contributions. But again, we've got obviously non-concessional rules. But again, just going back, if we do breach our non-concessional caps, which is not a big issue, effectively we will have to withdraw that at a later stage and then pay, obviously, include some taxable income based on, I think it's around about 9% of the excess non-concessional. So it's not a big issue, but the fact is, if we're left on death with an accumulation account that's ripe or pregnant with capital gains, and we want to pay that out to our adult child, or like if it's worst case scenario goes out to the estate, then the potential will be up for capital gains tax. And likewise, if they're an adult dependent, if there's a taxable component, there's also going to be a 17% tax on that, which includes Medicare and NDIS. So my thinking is, look, it's not a bad idea, particularly if you've got some senior members inside the fund, to consider whether we should actually be taking that capital out of the fund. Obviously, it'll be tax-free, which we're talking about people over age 60, and putting it into a family trust. And more importantly, I won't spend a huge amount of time, but what we call into a leading member family trust. Now, what I want to do is just talk about the leading member SMSF. This is something that's really taken me a couple of years to develop. And essentially from that is that what we're looking there is we've got a leading member of the fund. It provides succession planning. Sorry about the P there. We've got a bit of a typo. But it provides succession in the SMSF and also protection for bloodline or specific members of an SMSF business or family unit. So, for example, once we set up one of these leading member funds, we can direct the leading member to only pay out benefits to the bloodline. It really follows. Look, I've done a whole lot of webinars around that. I'll send you a link potentially for that, or just go on to our Lightyear Doc site and there's plenty there. But really, for the leading member, we've got one, then if that person dies or is incapacitated or bankrupt, so they have to leave the fund, we need to have a next person, then a next person, a next person, like that. So it just follows. It's much like the royal, you go from the Queen to Prince Charles down to William, and so on and so forth. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we embed that into our leading member. Advisors who are using this strategy generally charging about $3,500 to $4,000 to upgrade from a standard SMSF to a leading member SMSF. But remember, if you're on unlimited document platform for us, there's no cost there for you. So you can go through that process, and that means there's more money for your business. The leading member controls the fund with all members as directors. But look, if you've got a leading member and you've got, for example, mum who's older, doesn't want to be involved in the process, she can obviously provide her EPOA to the leading member. In fact, all of them can. You can have a 6-member fund with only one trustee, because everyone's given the EPOA to the leading member. Protection of their benefits, though. Under 52B and 52C of the SIS Act, there's a whole lot of covenants to be included there, that the leading member or the trustee has to be fair and reasonable, look after the benefits or the investments and the benefits for the family, so on and so forth. Leading member is always a chairman. They have the ability to appoint and remove trustees and also members. On death, generally, because you're building succession in here for generations, what will happen is one leading member comes in. We only have corporate trustee shares are owned by the leading member. So if you've got an existing corporate trustee, you cancel the shares for the non-leading member. So the leading member only holds the shares, and on the death of the leading member, you'll find in our company a leading member corporate trustee for an SMSF that their shares are cancelled, and the next leading member, new shares are issued to them. So again, cancellation happens on death, disability, or bankruptcy. So leading member, we'll do a lot more on that when I do come around. Now, coming around to one of my faves here, I've just got a couple of questions here. So we've got a big one there from Selma. I'll carry on. I'll just get to the end, and I'll probably look at I'll probably come, actually, Selma, if you could, because it's quite a detailed one, if you can just pull that out and send it to Grant at ilovesmsf.com. So Grant at ilovesmsf.com, and I'll look at that this afternoon. I've got someone said, can you please confirm that in a family discretionary trust, capital gains can be distributed to beneficiaries, but not capital losses? Absolutely. So when you have a look at a capital loss is always set against a capital gain to give you a net capital gain, and under law and also under discretionary trust, it can only be a net capital gain that's distributed. Any capital losses, if there's a surplus of them, obviously get locked inside the family trust. While I'm here, Joanne Chaplin, is there a way to change a current pension to add a reversionary, or does the pension need to be unwound and set up again? Yeah, so Joanne, you need to unwind it. So what we do is, if you go on the Lightyear Docs platform, again, there's a webinar on this, so a recording of a webinar. We roll it back and then we reset it and set up a brand new pension, which is the best way of going about things. And that particularly follows, even the commissioner at the moment said you can't change a trust to an account-based pension because they are completely different pensions. If you put a reversionary, because there's such a fundamental change to the pension, effectively go down that track. But again, if you're going to go down that track, you need to, here's a couple of things that I'd like to point out to you. When you note these things to your clients, particularly, I'll give you a lot more information when we do our estate planning and leading member later on in October, is the key there is we need to get our clients to sign indemnities for us. So, for example, Joanne, you can see some of the issues that we raised around a pension. It can be absolutely diabolical because it all ends up in the accumulation side. That at that stage, if a client doesn't want to go back and pay the costs of rolling back and restarting and building a quite comprehensive auto-reversionary pension, then you need to make sure that they give you an indemnity effectively that you're not going to be sued in relation to that. Anyway, let's go to the last strategy. So this is one of my faves on this one. We're getting towards the end, so I'm going to be about 5 minutes over the time, so sorry about that. Selma, make sure you send that to me. So what we're going to do is, if we've got clients who've got shares or managed funds outside an SMSF right at this present point in time, I want to use PCG 2016/5 and transfer those shares into the SMSF. Now, it doesn't matter if they're in a bucket company, in a family trust, or they're owned by the individual. Now, when we do that, we transfer it into the SMSF. We've got an LVR of 50%. We need to make a mortgage deed. So up on our Lightyear Docs site, we've got what we call strategy automation, which we've done for a related party loan in terms of property. But what we'll do is next week we'll be launching the one for shares. So you will be able to do instalment warrants around this. So one of the things is you want to probably, if you are doing this and you've got different parcels, because if you do want to sell some of the shares, you have to unwind that whole instalment warrant. So, for example, if I've got 100,000 BHP that I want to switch in, then I might have like 5 parcels of 20. So I do 5 lots of instalment warrants. And again, the documentation will actually build that for you. So whoever's transferring it in will actually give the funding. The rest could be then by way of a contribution. Now, the benefit of this, obviously, is the franked dividend income is shifted into an SMSF, where it's obviously, if you get excess credits, it's free money. Don't you love that thing? You know, tell clients we'd like to get free money, get a refund, so on and so forth. So that's a good thing. So franked dividends are great outside, but they're even better inside a self-managed super fund. There's capital gains on the shares that are realised by the transfer, by the switch into the concessionary tax fund. Ideally, we'd transfer them straight over to pension purposes. If we can set up a pension with those shares, and remember, it applies to managed funds or syndicated investments. Now, obviously, we can claim a concessional contribution. Remember, we talked about the 74-year-old before. It doesn't matter if we go above the caps. So we can clear out quite a lot. In fact, I could easily show you how to do a $1 million contribution in of shares under an LVR, non-concessional contributions, and then we have to pull some money. We have to pull the shares out later on, but we can clean up a lot of the capital gains tax through concessional contributions. Now, the benefit of that is that it will be a concessional contribution, but if we do it now, then effectively the imputation credits, which we've just switched in, can then be used to mitigate or minimise the contributions tax, which is coming up at year end. That's why it's so great to do this strategy now rather than wait to year end when we don't have the imputation credits. Get it in now, and you've got a good forerunning of what's coming up. And also gives us plenty of threshold to make future contributions or deductible or concessional contributions up to 30 June 2020. And if we don't use them, guess what? We get the money back. We get our free money. So again, the next 6 weeks is really important, but you guys, the planners and all that, you know when the dividends go ex-div. So just be careful on that one. Reporting season's coming up. And of course, the fund's going to get a tax deduction for interest costs payable throughout the year. But you've got to be careful on that one because it's a related party loan. Those interest costs will obviously be accessible outside. So look, I really love that strategy. It's one of my favourites. A couple of things is strategy. Basically, when I do a bit of wind up, one of the things I just want to do before I get down here, I just wanted to show you if you can just have a look. What we're doing here is SME crowdfunder or Funsition. We have just opened this morning our Lightyear Group equity raising. So if you'd like to have a look at the background of our group, we've only started our Lightyear docs in April, so our money's coming in terms of our May was very low because we only had it open for 5 days, but we've done quite significantly well. In fact, we're well and truly over budget for both June and July. So go and have a look at that. It's very fairly priced. The one reason I raise that for you is, again, you might want to use it for your SMSF, particularly if you're going to get on our platform. It's a good way of covering both. The other one there for us, though, is if you are on there, remember I had the $7.95 for the LY Strategies. It drops down to $6.95. Now, strategies are what we're all about. There's so many strategies involved in there. Pick one and then know that we've got your automation or your documentation covered, but we've also got plenty of support there for you. So you can contact us support at I Love SMSF in order to get technical support, particularly if you're on our LY Strategies or our Strategist platform, or you can contact me directly. It doesn't make any difference, like Selma did before. I'm going to get a question and then I'll respond to her very shortly on that one. So if we then go down, for smaller players, just do your Scholar. Make sure you get the CPD for $49 a month or $490 for the year. It's certainly great value. Larger combined firms, make sure you have a look at the other one and really want to make sure you got your best year ever. We've got from Vaughan Woods here, Grant, don't some retail funds allow reversionary nominations to be added post the commencement? Well, if they do, effectively, that is a brand new pension. So thank you for that, Vaughan. But they would be doing the documentation inside, but effectively it's a brand new pension. What we've got, because remember they're the trustee, for us as advisors, we need to go through that process of roll back and restart again. Importantly here we've got from Nav, thank you Nav, one of my favourite people in the world, down from Morgan's in Melbourne. When we have advised on warrants, you need a ADA1 accreditation as advisor. With this strategy, where do we stand? Really good question on that one, Nav. Leave that with me and I'll go through that process. Obviously, if we're transferring shares in and we're doing an instalment warrant, we are going to need to make sure that we provide an SOA around that process. So let's hope that there's a lot there to get your best SMSF year ever. We're in your corner. We're going to be there by your side and make sure that you have the best year ever. And watch out for our discretionary trust training session at 10 a.m. On this Thursday, as there is always a training session, the light year docs, and we'll send that through. So anyway, thank you very much for attending. That's 1 CPD hour for you, 0.25 general, 0.75 technical. I've had a lot of fun. Watch out, get on the system, get on the program, some great value there, and more importantly, use your SMSF to invest in light year docs and make the most of your underlying investment. It's Grant Abbott